Good morning to you. My name's Simon Wilson. I'm Head of Communications at the Green Climate Fund. Welcome to this event on the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. This is the first time we brought together the grant window and the investment window side of this program. It's very exciting. It's a partnership event, essentially. The whole program is about partnership. And to demonstrate that, we're trying to fit in 150 partners into an hour and a half. So I'm going to be very strict on timing as we move through. But I'm delighted to welcome our two first speakers, Ambassador Peter Thompson and Yannick Lemarek. Ambassador Thompson, first of all, UN Secretary General, Special Envoy for the Oceans. I'd like to invite you to make some framing remarks for us at the start of this session. That should work. You don't need to push any buttons. Ambassador Thompson.
Okay, I'll leave my mask on for the first 10 seconds or so because this is my brand, SDG 14. You've all agreed to it. All your governments signed up to it in 2015. We're going to implement it by 2030. You'll be at, no doubt, some of you will be at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon, 27th of June to 1st of July next year. Purpose of that is to keep this thing honest, conserving and sustainably using the resources of the ocean. That's what we've all agreed to do. So with that little bit of advertising, can I thank our host, particularly Yannick. He and I were in Marseille together at the World Conservation Congress talking about this event and some of the great things that are being done now by the Green Climate Fund. So thank you to GCF for hosting this event. My mind goes back, especially on a day like this. I've just come from the green zone, the hard-to-find zone. Walked over there, and I was addressing a mangrove event over there. Mangrove I think of as the beautiful twin of coral reefs in terms of benefits of what it does for us all. And I was reminding them of a day that I had in 2018 where we went up to northern part of Fiji where my family has lived for generations. And that coast, long coast, many hundreds of miles long, looks out onto a great sea reef. It's, I think, the third largest reef in the world, coral reef. In between, there's anything between like 30 miles to 5 miles of pristine lagoon, the best fishing grounds in Fiji. And then you've got hundreds of miles of dense mangrove forests, which is why the fishing is so good. But on the back of that, you have a sugarcane industry, which has been there since colonial times, which has been pumping on the ammonium fertilizer and all the other pollutants that come with it, the industrial mill, and the development of the coast, of course, with the sewage schemes, raw sewage just going in the lagoon. And long term, not good for coral. So the good news is that it seems that that reef is going to be one of the resilient reefs. As you know, the Indonesia, Cuba, Tanzania, Kenya, Philippines, they've got these resilient reefs, which will be the 10 to 30% that we're working with after 1.5, and the 1% that we'll be working with after 2 degrees. And so that Great Sea Reef is obviously not just a national treasure, but a global treasure. And on that day in 2018, out there we had the Prime Minister of Fiji, we had the head of the local communities all along that coast, we call them Turanga Tun Madawata, who had conferred with all his people up and down the coast. And they dedicated that coastline, the mangroves and the coral reef, to Ramsar Convention that day. And we decided, and Eric Solheim was there with me he was then head of UNEP, that we would get the funding to save this reef. And that meant big transformations on land. That's where we saw the main threat, of course. COP26, lowering down GHG emissions, stopping ocean warming, etc. But for local conditions, doing stuff on land. So rather than just talk about a good idea, the walking of the talk began, and the boardroom of the Green Climate Fund was one of the very important doors that had to be gone through. It's been gone through. Green Climate Fund has now dedicated significant funding towards those projects to save that great sea reef. And so, as a grandfather, and that's what this thing is about, this put together by my granddaughters to say, hey, it's about us, not you guys. It's their lives we're trying to protect here. that it gives me hope for them, because I see that, you know, the progress is a process. You've got to start somewhere. And this is evidence now from the Green Climate Fund that, you know, we are having progress on our particular situation. So just to close, look, I've found this to be the most positive COP I've ever been at. Why is that? Nature-based solutions are no longer these little teddy bears at the door where everybody's clamoring to be part of nature-based solutions. The ocean is no longer knocking at the door. We're now inside, we're at the top table. Countries that were deniers of climate change, that tried to white ant the process, they've now announced their targets as to when they're going to be carbon neutral. That old argument about is this real or not, that's just gone. Everybody is just concentrating now on the solutions, how to fund them, how to put them in place. So it's a very different COP from any that has preceded it. And central in all that is coral, because we can't have a healthy planet without a healthy ocean. And how can you have a healthy ocean without coral? It's 25% of the ocean's biodiversity. So, you know, we are addressing a very serious subject here in this event. Thank you very much, Anna, for giving me the time to speak before you.
Ambassador Thompson, thank you. Thank you so much for those remarks. I now invite our Executive Director of GCF, Yannick Lemarek, to say a few words in introduction.
It's really a pleasure to have you in our joint GCF pavilion. And thank you very much to all our colleagues for joining us today for this important event. We had Prime Minister Mia Mottley with us last Tuesday for a discussion on how to catalyze climate finance at scale. And it was, she made a very, very moving intervention. And she said, basically, I will quote our word, that climate change is eating away the capacity to survive of small island development states. But she had also a message of hope, where she highlighted the role that blue economy could play in order to arrest and reverse these trends. And as far as GCF is concerned, we basically fully endorse every single word she said during this intervention. The blue economy and the preservation of coastal and marine ecosystem can play a critical role for the sustainable development of seeds, can play a critical role for preserving biodiversity, and can play a critical role for averting catastrophic climate change. But it's extraordinarily important to act. 20 years ago, we thought that there would be no systemic risk to entire ecosystem before we will reach an increase in average global temperature of about 4 degrees Celsius. Today, we fear that we could see the bulk of coral reef disappear before we even reach 2 degrees Celsius. So it could be anywhere between 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. And you hear frightening figures such as 90% of coral reef that could disappear. And 2050 and 2 degrees Celsius, if we cannot ensure a green climate resilient recovery, it could be before 2050. And that means before 2050, the livelihood of more than $1 billion on Earth, billion people on Earth could disappear. And so what we have in front of us is basically an existential problem. It's an unbelievable, unspeakable catastrophe. And so, all the signs are definitely very worrisome. The 2020 report on the status of coral reefs basically told us that between 2009 and 2018, we have lost 14% of coral reef. That's the equivalent of the Great Reef Barriers of Australia. So we need to scale up action for the against climate change, action for preserving coral reef. And this requires quite a lot of finance. we need to dramatically scale up financing for coastal and marine protection. GCF today is the world's largest multilateral climate fund. We have $37 billion of assets under management, including $10 billion of co-financing from GCF. We try to achieve 50-50 between adaptation and mitigation. We are at 48-52 right now, and we emphasize a lot ecosystem-based protection. So we are committed to the fight against coral reef, and we are committed to allocate a significant share of our resources. But even if we are the largest multilateral climate fund, and even if we are committed to addressing the coral reef crisis, our resources are nothing compared to the magnitude of the problem. And so what we have to do is that we have to use our resources in a highly catalytic manner to shift much, much, much larger financial flows toward coral reef protection. We have to move from hundreds of millions to hundreds of billions. And when we speak in billions and trillions, we speak about capital markets. We speak about the private sector. There is no government coffer with that kind of money. And so with our partners, we have been trying to figure out, okay, how can we use our resources in the most catalytic manner to scale up action to preserve coral reef and to preserve the livelihood of 1 billion people on Earth. And I'm immensely grateful to Greg, from the CEO of Pegasus Capital Advisor, because he has been key in our thinking about how we could move ahead. And in certainly starting to think about private equity. You know, the first time I heard private equity for coral reef 2 years ago, I said, what is that? It's already difficult to get grant. We cannot already convince people that it's important enough for grant. And we have to convince people that it's important enough for private equity. And actually over the past 2 years, we have been working on how we could establish a private equity fund for coral reef. And our board approved a $500 million private equity fund for coral reef 2 weeks ago. How did we do it? We took a very high risk position. GCF is serving as the anchor equity investor. We are the first to put our money on the table. GCF is serving as the first lost equity investor. We are the first to lose our money if something goes wrong. And GCF is serving as the main fund closer. For the first close, we will be the dominant investor. It's the maximum amount of risk you can take when it comes to a private equity fund. And we decided to take this huge amount of risk because we knew that if we were not to take this risk, we will not convince senior equity investors to come on board for this highly innovative initiative. Now, why did we feel comfortable about taking this amount of risk? First, we were reassured by the tentative pipeline that Greg and Pegasus Capital Advisor came up with. We thought that this idea of having a balance between relatively safe assets, basically green tourism, sewage treatment, and less safe assets, sustainable mariculture, sustainable fisheries, and much, much less safe assets, but extremely interesting assets such as productive and sustainable use of kelp forest as a bio fertilizer, as a biopharmaceutical, where basically was giving us potentially a chance for success. And the second major reason why GCF decided to take this risk was the technical assistance window, that we were not to be on our own, that our private equity fund will be the finance window of a global funds for coral reef that will have a technical window, $150 million, in addition to our $500 million, and that this technical window will basically capacitate countries to identify and prioritize investment in order to preserve coral reef. And so between the two, if we work as true partners, if we bring this completely unusual coalition of UN agencies, civil society organization, philanthropic organization, and a multilateral climate fund, that if this partnership works, we stand a fighting chance. And if we succeed, we will have proven that investing in initiative to preserve coral reef is a legitimate investment for pension funds, is a legitimate investment for sovereign fund. We will have created a new asset class. What does it mean? It means that next time you go to see your banker, you can say, sorry for whoever wrote my speech, which was excellent, but I was not to write a speech after. We will have, basically, next time you go to see your banker, you can say, you know, for my saving, I want 5% of my savings to be invested in preserving coral reef, and hopefully you will get a return on it. So to all of those who made this one possible, I would like to express my deepest thanks. And if in 3 to 4 years we have established a new asset classes, GCF will treat you for champagne.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yannick. Thank you so much. We'll make sure we recycle the speech and get some use out of it. Can we now see a very short video just to show the background to the fund? I think we have a 1-minute video to play.
The Global Fund for Coral Reefs aims to alleviate the adverse impacts of local threats which are prevalent these days, which include plastic pollution, sewage waste, and unsustainable tourism and unsustainable fishing. This project is extremely exciting because it represents the first initiative of its kind in the world, with multiple parties coming together representing a unique public-private partnership model, with grant assistance being provided to develop early stage ideas, with technical assistance and policy support being provided through the grant window, whereas the barriers that private sector investors face being addressed through the investment window through a tailored approach that the GCF is taking to this investment.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm now delighted that we're joined online, virtually, by the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Elizabeth Marima. Elizabeth, if you can hear us, the floor is yours.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much. Many thanks for the invitation to this important event, and apologies for not being there with you in person. In the biodiversity world, we have long understood the critical importance of coral reefs and the diverse ecosystem that they support, having more species per unit area than any other marine environment on Earth, supporting at least 25% of the marine species, despite covering only 0.2% of the sea floor. Unfortunately, coral reefs are rapidly sounding their alarms as they face ever-increasing synergistic pressures from ocean warming, pollution, and habitat degradation. Although we have seen growing action to protect and preserve coral reefs, we have not seen action at scale needed. Furthermore, the drivers of coral reef degradation are still increasing. Of course, we need to protect coral reefs through well-managed protected areas, but we also need to look beyond just conservation, recognizing that coral reefs are the center of the complex socio-ecological systems and support social, cultural, and economic well-being. We need to support local communities whose livelihood are so dependent on coral ecosystems and invest in their resilience to recovery in the face of major shocks. We need to empower these communities to be able to fully take up the mantle of coral reef stewardships. We also need to invest in the restoration of reef ecosystems through adaptive approaches and new technologies. In this regard, it is encouraging to see the fund taking the multifaceted approach to achieving its objectives. And thanks to the Green Climate Fund for further supporting it. We already have many solutions at our fingertips. We know of the Earthshot Prize-winning Coral Vita program that aims to scale up coral growth, and replanting shows us that great potential to restore coral reefs can happen. We know of the Green Fins initiative, which works to support use of environmental guidelines for diving and snorkeling companies in tropical areas, shows us clearly valuable approaches to transition to sustainable tourism. The TIDE program in Belize, which trains young local people on how to research and monitor coral reefs, shows us the power of investing into the local community. These are just few of the many solutions that can be made up to scale. Currently, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the parties are developing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which contains a new set of global goals and targets for biodiversity to be adopted at the second part of the Conference of the Parties later next year. This framework will need to elevate our collective ambition for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And major investments will be needed if we hope to be able to achieve the goals of the framework. Therefore, the Coral Fund, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, comes at the perfect moment as parties truly need support to live up to the ambition needed to reverse biodiversity loss. By aligning its work to the goals of the post-2020 framework, as well as the Climate Convention and other relevant processes, the fund will be a powerful tool for implementation, for tracking progress towards global goals and targets, and for elevating awareness of our collective goals for future with a healthy and robust coral ecosystem. As we move forward in scaling up implementation, including through the fund, we also need to keep our focus on those local communities who are stewards of the coral reefs and ensure that depriving them their livelihood, these efforts will not contribute to their long-term well-being. In closing, I call on public and private sectors to contribute to the fund and urge governments and other stakeholders to make best use of this fund in order to catalyze lasting impacts on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madam Executive Secretary. Thank you for joining us today. Yannick mentioned the range of partners, including philanthropies. I'm now very pleased to be joined virtually again by the Managing Director of Policy and Government Relations at Vulcan, representing the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, Chuck Cooper. Chuck, if you can hear us, then please, I invite you to say a few words.
Yes, thank you very much. As chair of the executive board of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, it's an honor to participate in this event. On behalf of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs board members, global team, and coalition partners, I'd like to thank the Green Climate Fund for its generous support, which will unlock coral reef positive investments and empower local communities who depend on them for their food security, livelihoods, and coastal protection. I'd also like to thank our Global Fund for Coral Reefs partner, the United Kingdom, which, as the host of COP26, is putting nature at the heart of the conference and prioritizing the conservation and restoration of coral reefs and related ecosystems. Thank you also to Canada, which joined the UK, France, and Germany as a government donor earlier this week with an announcement at COP26. At the time we held the first planning workshop for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs back in 2018, We knew that coral reefs were experiencing the greatest extinction risk of any ecosystem due to climate change and other human pressures, including pollution, overfishing, and coastal development. We also knew that coral reefs were immensely important to 1/4 of all marine life and to the 1 billion people who rely on them. At the time, one key unanswered question was, why is the global response not commensurate with the threat? When we were looking at creating the Global Fund for Coral Reefs, one number really jumped out. Only 1/100th of 1% of climate finance was going to coral reefs, despite a CBD high-level panel's assessment 3 years earlier that, quote, climate change adaptation funds will be a key target for enhancing coral reef resilience and enabling social adaptation over the long term. So we learned that not only was there a coral reef crisis, but there was a huge coral reef funding gap. Having identified the problem, the threat of coral reef extinction, and an inadequate international response, the solution came into focus. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs partners decided to launch a blended finance mechanism with 2 very specific purposes. First, unlock climate finance, and second, catalyze private investment. This dual focus is on the first page of our terms of reference and guides every decision that we make. The Green Climate Fund's landmark investment of $125 million will significantly advance both objectives, unlocking climate finance and catalyzing private investment in coral reefs across multiple developing countries, including several highly climate vulnerable small island developing states. In June 2021, the IPCC and IPBES, the International Scientific Authorities on Climate Change and Biodiversity, found that the climate and biodiversity crises are inextricably linked through both common drivers and solutions, and that addressing these crises will require a fully integrated approach. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs is an important mechanism to mobilize resources for the implementation of both nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement and actions to achieve the global goals for nature under the Convention on Biological Diversity. Our objective is for the Global Fund for Coral Reefs to serve as a demonstration fund. We want to collectively pool our resources to show which new large-scale solutions can achieve both our conservation and investment objectives. We also want to move from a project-by-project approach to a programmatic approach that's driven by an evidence-based global strategy. We believe, despite the dire predictions, that if we act with urgency over the next decade, and importantly, we mobilize the necessary resources to implement proven approaches, we can change the trajectory of the coral reef crisis. We're asking all of you to join us, whether as a donor, a co-funder, an implementing partner, an advocate, or a thought leader. It's not too late, but we must act now, and we must act with urgency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Thanks for joining us today. So we've now heard about both sides of the program. We wanted to, first of all, before we move to the panel discussion, we wanted to shine a little spotlight on some of the national programs being developed. So I'd like to invite Shanique to take the stage. We're going to hear about the work in the Bahamas from Shanique Albury-Smith. But before we do that, Shanique, we're going to go virtually to hear about Fiji. And our first spotlight is going to be on the Fiji program. And I hope we're joined by Jody Smith, the head of local strategic vision and sourcing pipeline businesses in Taki. Jody, can you join us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Please tell us about Fiji, what's being done there.
Yes, firstly, thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I'm actually a Scottish Fijian, and I think there can't be many of us in the world. I certainly feel like I'm there with you in spirit. So I'm one of the founders of a Fijian business and development and investment company called Matanataki. And Matanataki is the Fijian word for action. So I came to Fiji, which is the birthplace of my mother, about 10 years ago. And I came to turn around a failing agricultural business. And it was right beside the ocean. So during that experience, I was able to learn firsthand about the really devastating impact that we're having on our soils and the water systems which are right beside them. And my time here has really been defined by a series of discoveries. And these discoveries have helped shape Matanataki's response to solving these really urgent ecological and economic problems at the coalface. Another early discovery was about how poorly fishers and farmers are treated. The system really forces us to farm and to fish in ways that are destructive. We have to compete with each other, then we're competing with other nations, and we have to deliver these commodities as cheaply as possible. And then really bizarrely, we're importing goods from overseas, so fruit, vegetables, fertilizers, fuel, even things like chickens and seeds and fish. And these are all things that we could and should be producing here. So my next discovery was that little has really changed since when my great-great-grandfather first arrived in Fiji. He came here 160 years ago from China. And he came here for commodities that are still being shipped out today. So trees, fish, and sugar, and they're still going out unprocessed and raw. And additionally, between when he arrived and now, we've managed to commoditize our beaches, which we have become very dependent on economically. And as we've been hearing, in 30 years or less, our coral reefs may be gone. This also means that our white sanded beaches may be gone. So I really feel from where I'm sitting here in Fiji that we're in a race to the bottom and we keep repeating the same mistakes. So if we really want to save our oceans and our reefs, we need to change how we produce everything. We need to also change how the money flows, and we need to change what the money demands. So the Global Fund for Coral Reefs and the key funding that's coming from the GCF, I see this as being a systems changing financing mechanism. It's going to enable businesses and communities in Fiji to really change the game on the ground. The fund will provide a platform as well as the risk capital for entrepreneurs to be able to dream big, but also to deliver big. And it's also going to provide grants that are needed to fund vital work, which are too risky for traditional investors. And crucially, the fund will also support us to localize. It's going to enable technology transfer, the building of local industry, which will enable us to create high value and low impact products and services. We're going to be showing a video shortly, and in that you'll see some of the investable businesses that we're undertaking in Fiji. We've actually got over 40 deals here. Some are as small as $500,000, some are as big as $40 million, and we're across a number of key sectors, so waste, fisheries, tourism, and agriculture. We're also able to support communities and scientists adapt private sector thinking into what they do in order to create new revenue streams, which mean they won't be so dependent on sporadic grants. One thing we see in Fiji is a lot of white elephants, and I would dare say this is an issue across the global south. But financing mechanisms such as the GFCR are going to help us change this age of white elephants. They're going to help us end the age of white elephants. Before I go to a video about the GFCR pilot in Fiji, I'd like to end with my most recent discovery. And this comes from a conversation I had with Dr. Austin Bowden Kirby. He's one of Fiji's leading coral scientists. And I'm going to paraphrase what he said. 20 million years old, Jody. That's how old coral reefs are. And we have 30 years of them left because the equivalent of a massive fire is coming. So imagine that the coral reefs are like a forest. We have to go and we have to collect all the seeds and all the seedlings we can, and we have to make them safe. You and your business owners, you've got to put out the local fires. You've got to put out the threats coming from agriculture, waste, overfishing. And then once the rest of the world has figured out how to put out the global fire, then the communities of Fiji can start the work of helping our coral reefs heal themselves. So I hope the video that we're going to show provides a glimpse into the work that we're able to do in Fiji, and Vanaka Vakalevu to the GFCR and the GCF for making some of this work possible.
Thank you so much, Jody. Thank you so much to you. And let's roll the video of the Fiji Project, please.
Fiji has some of the most resilient reefs in the world. Under a 2-degree warming scenario, Fiji's reefs are the most likely to survive. These corals could be used to reseed reefs around the world that have died in 20 to 30 years' time. But if we don't stop the local anthropogenic threats, then these reefs will not survive. In Fiji, we have a problem. We have poor waste and pollution management. We have agricultural runoff. We have deforestation driven by agriculture. We have overfishing. We need to stop these issues if we're going to save our reefs.
These actions are causing damaging ripple effects that we are witnessing in real time that seriously threaten the survival of our coral reef systems and key marine species. My name is Natasha Morosi. I'm the Director of Conservation for Bang Adventure Divers and the Program Coordinator for My Fiji Shark. Our solution is to establish fully protected fish banks, allowing marine biodiversity to expand and to overflow.
My name is Jodie Smith and I work with Matanataki. At Matanataki, we work with private sector businesses who can bring about transformational change to the environment and to Fiji's reef systems. In Fiji, our waste has not been managed properly historically. Most of our dump sites, they sit on the coast. They sit on mangrove. We were walking on one of these dump sites earlier today, and it's basically a floating mass of waste right beside the ocean.
That entire zone, that entire dump is actually floating in a marine ecosystem, which is a breeding ground for our fisheries and our food. Hi, my name's Paul Evers, and I work for HG Leach, and we run the only international standard landfill here in the South Pacific. The Vulavullasara project is a visionary project that will contain 80% of solid waste away from the marine ecosystems, thereby protecting the marine ecosystems. We will upcycle 80% of that waste, especially plastics, back into the circular economy in the South Pacific. This will become a model for the whole of the South Pacific to tackle this challenge of waste management and marine protection.
I'm Sanjeev Chand, the founder of the Fertile Factory and Company and one of the directors of Waste Clear Fiji Limited. We will be replacing imported chemical fertilizer. We will be making a natural product using what is now considered waste. So the wasted opportunities, which is all the biomass, green waste, will be turned into a product that would be a natural fertilizer. And once we unite our farmers with our natural products, the impact, the devastation that has been caused by chemical runoffs from these fertilizers over decades on our reef system, slowly but surely, we will turn that around.
We're able to bring government, the private sector, the general public, the communities, we can all come together, and of course the donors and the investors. We can all come together to solve the problem. And I think this is something that in the past has been missing. Multiple stakeholders, innovative blended finance, and local solutions. We haven't had this bigger picture approach, and this is what this program is providing.
Thank you. And thank you to Jodie for bringing us a probably quite unique Fijian Scottish perspective on coral reefs as well. So let's move from Fiji to the Bahamas next. I'm delighted to be joined by Shanique Albury-Smith, the Bahamas Program Director for the Nature Conservancy. Can you tell us a little bit, Shanique, about the program in the Bahamas?
Sure. Thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here this morning to share some details on the Global Fund for Coral Reefs program in the Bahamas, which was designed by the Nature Conservancy in collaboration with the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund, the Bahamas National Trust, Blue Finance, the Perry Institute of Marine Science, the Bahamas Access Small Business Accelerator Development Center, the Elizabeth Harbor Partnership, and Coral Vita. Now, I purposely listed all of those partners to emphasize that this is a partnership that really is designed to bring in all of the key stakeholders at the national level who are involved with anything that has to do with coral conservation, protection, or reducing of threats to coral reefs. Our program is entitled Impact Funding for Bahama Reefs, and we hope this partnership is going to be implemented over an 8-year period starting in early 2022. Bahama Reefs will facilitate the investment in businesses and innovative finance mechanisms that contribute to the resilience of coral reefs and surrounding local communities in the Bahamas. But let me just put into context the significance of coral reefs for the Bahamas. There are at least 45 species of coral found in our country. Based on recent mapping conducted by the Caribbean Division of TNC, in the Bahamas, there's over 500,000 square miles of coral reefs. Several global studies suggest that Bahamas contains one of the most extensive stands of resilient coral reef, or what we refer to often as climate refugia. And looking at the socioeconomic side of the significance for reefs, a study has found that every year in the Bahamas, over 1 million tourist visitors are coming to the Bahamas for activities that are directly linked to reefs. And that's not even the indirect activities. Okay, and the highest tourism value for a coral reef in the Bahamas is $5.7 million per square kilometer per year. Despite the importance of all of this coral reef to the Bahamas, we have seen a decline in our reefs over the years, similar to other places. Key drivers of this decline includes poorly designed coastal development, overfishing, impacts of climate change such as warming temperatures, coral bleaching. We recently confirmed stony coral tissue loss disease in the Bahamas in early 2020. So all of these things are leading to degradation. In an effort to reverse this decline of corals in the Bahamas, this Bahama Reefs program has been designed to facilitate investment in projects and businesses that promote healthier, more resilient coral reefs and surrounding communities. The vision is to build a scalable, investable pipeline of reef-positive businesses that will provide economic opportunities. And this is really going to be transformational. Right now in the Bahamas, most of the coral reef conservation protection activities is squarely within conservation. It's being funded 100% through grants and philanthropic funding. So really trying to be bringing stakeholders from the private sector, as well as looking at bringing in equity that is going to try to scale up the impact of what we're doing in conservation is really going to be transformational and quite a shift from what's happening on the ground in the country at the moment. So just to give you an example of some of the projects we are going to support in our initial pipeline, Bahama Reefs is going to be working with the Bahamas Reef Rescue Network, which is going to be building the capacity of tourism-related businesses such as dive shops to incorporate coral restoration into their revenue generation streams for their businesses. The Earthshot Prize winner, Coral Vita, is also a part of our pipeline in the Bahamas, and they will be refining their model of offering large-scale coral restoration services. Bahama Reefs also is going to be supporting the Bahamas National Trust, one of the managers of our protected area system in the Bahamas, and Blue Finance, with looking at how can they generate sustainable financing models for effective management of protected areas in the Bahamas that are climate refugia. We're going to be working with another group, the Elizabeth Harbor Partnership in Elizabeth Harbor, which is one of the most busy harbors for boating traffic in the Bahamas, to install a mooring field as well as offering pump-out services for boats. That doesn't happen at the moment, in an effort to improve water quality and to reduce damage to reefs and seagrass beds in the harbor. Hand in hand with that, TNC is also going to be working on some innovative financing models in the Bahamas. In particular, we're going to be looking at a blue carbon project that's related to mangrove restoration, and reef and mangrove insurances, again, as ways of generating revenue that can support coral reef conservation. Despite hand in hand with all of these benefits for the reefs, we also want to make sure we're benefiting the communities who live and live off of these reefs nearby. So clearly demonstrating the results for local communities and the benefit for local communities is going to be a critical factor of success for our project. Based on our initial estimates, we have determined that this project is going to support healthier reefs near to 100,000 people, in the Bahamas. We are working with the Small Business Accelerator, looking at blue economy businesses, hoping to impact at least 50 businesses in our initial tranche of funding. That's going to impact support over 100 jobs and even more than that, perhaps. We also will be building capacity, particularly of women, to be leaders in the businesses that we are going to be supporting. And through our Blue Carbon project, we anticipate that we are going to yield benefits in avoided property damage loss in the order of $144 million for 2 islands in the Bahamas. So as you can see, we've designed a very ambitious program, and we believe that it's going to be transformational for scaling up coral reef protection and conservation in the Bahamas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanique. Thank you. That's really exciting to hear about what's planned and what's already underway in the Bahamas and Fiji as well. It's great. So thank you for joining us. Just before we go to our panel discussion, I'm delighted to be joined. I thought you were joining us by Zoom. I'm not even going to ask how you made it through security, Sanjeev, but let's not go there. But I'm delighted to be joined by Sanjeev Krishnan, who's the Chief Investment Officer of S2G Ventures from Builders Vision. Sanjeev, can you tell us, the microphone should be working, can you tell us what is your involvement and engagement with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs?
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm hopefully not in Zoom, otherwise there's bigger issues here. I'm Sanjeev Krishnan, I represent Builders Vision. We're so excited to be involved with the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. We've talked a lot about the why, so I'm not going to repeat all of the things we've already talked about. I do want to point out that this is the largest blended capital platform focused on the ocean. The Global Fund for Coral Reefs, we think, is an essential opportunity to advance coral reef conservation. With reefs on the front line, the urgency of this opportunity is now, in our view. And so Builders Vision is a newly launched impact platform launched by Lucas Walton, a third-generation member of the Walton family. Our vision is a humane, healthy planet, and we want to do that through shifting markets and minds. So from grants to philanthropic capital, all the way to venture capital and real asset investing. Today, we're proud to announce our intention to be part of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. One of the things we really like about the fund, similar to the Builders Vision platform, is that it seeks to deploy capital across a blended finance capital stack. The fund is establishing an international network of partnerships with NGOs to deploy grant capital for support of technical capacity and advisory services to prepare projects and businesses for investment capital. Once these projects are ready for investment capital, the fund will work in partnership with Pegasus, the fund's investment window manager, to invest. First with concessionary capital from the Green Climate Fund, and then market rate investments in business solutions that work to protect and sustain coral reef system. This multiple stack approach is the key feature that we at Builders think will ensure success of the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. Builders Vision is excited to be working in partnership with this global coalition, including the UN agencies, Pegasus Capital Advisors, the Green Climate Fund, the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation, the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, and the governments of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany in this endeavor. We encourage other private investors and philanthropic partners to join in this effort to close the coral reef funding gap. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you. Thank you and welcome. It's great to have you on board. Thank you for that announcement. That's wonderful. Sanjeev, I'm going to ask you now, along with Shanique, you're liberated from the stage. Thank you both very much. Can I invite our panelists to come onto the stage now, please, for the panel discussion? So I'd like to welcome, we have Priti Sinha, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Capital Development Fund. We have Professor Gideon Henderson, Chief Scientific Advisor for UK Government's DEFRA. We have Craig Kogut, the CEO of Pegasus Capital Advisors. And we have Henry Gonzalez, the Private Sector Facility Director for the Green Climate Fund. So welcome to all four of you. Without further ado, I'm going to go first of all to Priti and to ask you first of all to tell us a little bit about how GFCR is breaking through. How is it breaking through these silos between public and private sector, and what are these two windows, the grant and investment windows? How are they going to work together to deliver the kind of benefits and gains that we've heard about today?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. We've already heard a lot today. So let me try to now get into a bit more detail here. So as you've heard, and I'm going to repeat some of the numbers, the coral reef ecosystem impacts 1 billion people. It also provides up to 10 trillion in vital ecosystem services that the oceans provide us. And it's about 25% of marine biodiversity. So having heard all those numbers, 3 UN agencies decided to come together. So that's the UNDP, UNEP, and then my agency, which is the UN Capital Development Fund. All of us working together, we began to build the beginnings of this fund. And what this fund represents, and I'm going to try to break that down, there is a grant grant window of 125 million. We hope that will grow if needed. And then comes the investment window, which is now 500 million, which has the GCF 125 and the Pegasus, the other on top of that. So 375. So this is the whole structure. Now I'm going to focus on the grant part, because what we are doing there as the UN Capital Development Fund, we are using this grant money to really help build this ecosystem. So now I shift to what we heard from the Bahamas and Jody from Fiji. So we are on the ground. One strength of the UN is to be on the ground. Our colleagues are there. And we are very much associated with the countries. Countries are the most important partners for us. So we are helping build the enabling environment, helping seed some of the entrepreneurs, helping all that horrible waste, that we saw, helping kind of attack that situation by really providing some instances of grants, but even concessional loans and guarantees to that incubation pipeline. So once we do that, then the projects and the entrepreneurs are ready for the investment pipeline. And GCF will tell us, then they provide the first loss, which is great, and all of this accelerates and unlocks private capital. So that's what we're doing, and just to say that leads to real impact. We're calling it the conservation impact, conservation impact in the sense that this is a reef-positive investment strategy, this whole Global Fund for Coral Reefs. I'm calling it the only reef-positive investment strategy. And it's also addressing the coral reef funding gap, right? So I'm so happy to have all the partners here. I'm going to turn it over now to the next speakers who will give you more detail on the investment window. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Preeti. Thank you. Let's go next to Gideon Henderson. Professor Henderson, thanks for joining us. We've heard about the role of states amongst other actors within this. Why is the UK involved? What's the nature of the UK's involvement in GFCR?
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I must say I feel slightly uncomfortable here as a scientist with a scientific background engaging with a group of financiers, but it's such valuable work that's going on here with such ability to make a change. As a scientist, I'm certainly very aware of the damage that we have already done to coral reefs and the wider ocean environment through our activities, and the increasing damage that is being acted on them through the climate change that we're causing, and of course that we're here at the COP meeting to address both through mitigation and adaptation measures. But despite my scientific leanings in this area, I am happy to talk about the money, particularly from a UK government point of view. And I should start by mentioning the Blue Planet Fund. This is a 500 million UK pound commitment announced by the UK Prime Minister at the G7 earlier this year, which is designed to support development, developing countries to really handle better the ocean environment. The Blue Planet Fund, through this investment, wants to do a lot. It wants to protect and restore nature. It certainly wants to tackle climate from mitigation and adaptation. And of course, it wants to support and help the world's poor. And we're only going to be able to achieve that wide range of outcomes by really integrating lots of different disciplines. So it needs the science that I specialize in, but it clearly also needs to be thinking about the governance structures that are used in the field and for the whole operation. It needs to work closely with communities if it's going to get traction. And of course, it has to be paid for. It has to have money, and private finance is an important part of that. So that gives the context for the UK's interest in the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. At the moment, I think a number was given earlier in these presentations about the percentage of money that goes into the marine ecosystem and the marine funding. From an aid point of view, we know that less than 1% of global aid goes into supporting the marine environment and the livelihood that it delivers to people. And that's something we really have to correct, and we certainly have to correct it for coral reefs. We've got to see more investment going into the coral reef environment. Why? Well, first of all, I think it's to anyone who's swum on a coral reef or snorkeled or dived on a coral reef, they're just wonderful. Aren't they wonderful environments? Aren't they inspirational and awe-inspiring environments? And I think as humans, we have a connection to coral reefs, which is very powerful. And there's a cultural attachment across the world to coral reefs. So we have to support that we have to recognize that and nurture it. But of course, there are all sorts of environmental and climate reasons why we also care about coral reefs, which we've heard about from the other speakers. So that's the reason we must do more. If we're going to achieve the more, we need to bring in both private and public finance. The blended finance model that is the underpinning of the fund is a fantastic platform to achieve that. That blended finance, it gives confidence to the private finance that you have governments in the same place. It gives a target for the private finance and those investors. So you get mutual leverage and huge potential as a consequence. We should better correct the underfunding through that. So far this year, the UK have committed 5 million towards the grant programme of the fund as part of the Blue Planet Fund. We hope to do more, and we recognise that we are only one of several countries that have committed to this to the fund, and we're delighted to see Canada's commitment of 6 million here at the COP meeting. There is a lot of ocean activity here at this COP. At the last COP, it was branded as the Blue COP. As presidents this year, the UK have been very keen to see a continued blue presence and ocean presence throughout this COP, as well as a central component of nature throughout this activity. And of course, coral reefs and the wider ocean environment are a fundamental part of that nature and of the natural solutions we have to climate change. That's why the UK is interested. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gideon. Thank you. Yeah, I think we can applaud him. Thanks for reminding us. Thanks for telling us about the UK commitment, for reminding us of the scientific basis, but also just it's good to hear, and it's wonderful to hear just a reminder of the beauty of the coral reefs that we're talking about here today as well, and why we need to preserve them for those reasons too. Let me turn now to Craig Kogut, the CEO of Pegasus Capital. Craig, we've heard a lot about the investment window today. Can you tell us a little bit more about how it's structured? Why is this such a novel approach towards financing and towards support for coral reefs?
Thank you, Simon. Before I do, I want to thank Chuck, who was on Thank you. Before I answer your question, let me just first of all call out our other co-chair from Monaco on the Coral Reef Fund, who's in back, Prince Albert's Foundation, which, like the Paul Allen Foundation and Chuck, have been so wonderful. Sylvie, so thank you for everything. They were really, together with the UN, various agencies, the inspiration for this fund, and we've been both fortunate and take the heavy responsibility to come in and invest. And before I do answer your question, let me, as to what Gideon was saying, I, in 2018, was in the Seychelles, and I had a 2016 guidebook telling me the best reef to dive in. I got there was no reef. 2 years later, it was 2016 copyright. We know how dire the situation is, but at the same time, we're dealing with immense opportunity as well as challenges. When you think about both from a climate perspective, a livelihood perspective, feeding the planet with all the protein that's in the oceans and in coral reefs. So what we're doing here is, first of all, and by the insights, and Yannick actually did a better finance job than I can in describing what we do, what you're doing. The Green Climate Fund has stepped up and made possible by putting a sizable investment, which in and of itself as an anchor investor would be significant, but they've put up $125 million of a $500 million fund. Not only have they put up that money first, they've also said they get no money until other investors get 9% on their money and their money back. Then, beyond that, the Green Climate Fund gets their money back, but only a 3% return. So not only is it junior capital, first loss capital, it effectively helps subsidize the returns on the other investors. So it really is a landmark. Now, hopefully, we're not going to need that. I mean, the Green Climate Fund and blended finance should change. Maybe you need less money to do, but it's meant to inspire confidence in the private sector. Not only are the oceans dramatically underfunded generally, they're way more underfunded on the private side. So as Chuck said in his talk, which this is a demonstration project, but with that we have to get it right. And there are people around this table who know we have to get it right. Because if we get this right, other monies will flow, and we won't have to do quite as blended a product. But the idea is to take science, which we know. I mean, there's lots of good science. There are lots of good technologies, some of which are being used on land. And some of the interventions we'll do will be on land, and prove we can have a viable economic model that can be replicated, which will also create livelihoods and will be sustainable to attract future investment and nurture. There's some wonderful entrepreneurs. Our colleague from the Bahamas mentioned Coral Vita. It's an amazing coral company. There are wonderful kelp technologies going. We had a conference I mentioned with Sylvie the other day in California with 7 wonderful kelp companies and seaweed companies, 4 of whom are focused on tropical kelp, which not only can provide food, not only can provide pharmaceuticals, but also have the potential to capture carbon and store carbon. So this is going to literally be a partnership, but it's all made possible with the Green Climate Fund with that first contribution. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Craig. Let's turn then to GCF and turn to Henry Gonzalez, who's the Director of Private Sector Facility at GCF. Henry, as well as hosting this event here today, we've heard about GCF's role in the program. Do you want to complement what Craig said a little bit and talk about what GCF's role is within this program?
Sure. Thank you very much, Simon, and my fellow panelists. I think it's extremely clear that partnership and collective action is what makes this fund possible, both on the grant window as well as the investment window. Maybe another important element is that here we have a very strong country-driven approach, and we really want to empower those that are the ones being vulnerable and feeling the most of these stressing situations of the reefs. This fund, with the partnership that we did with Pegasus, we are able to work in 17 countries that have given what we call the no objection letter. The GCF works with a country ownership, and all our programs have to be aligned with country programs, and hopefully also with their countries' NDCs in order to align the climate action with our investments. But the beauty of this mix of countries is that we have a lot of small island development states, but we were able to bring seeds from Africa, seeds from the Pacific, and seeds from the Caribbean. And I think this is extremely important because capital to flow to some of these regions is very difficult because the barriers of doing small ticket sizes or also the perceived high risk make sometimes these investments not possible. I think with Pegasus' expertise of building multi-country programs allow for this capital to flow to those countries in a correct way. We also have Latin American countries, we also have African countries, and we also have Asian countries. So here we have a very, I would say, diverse set of potential countries, and granted, the investments will go into those countries where you would have the best possible bankable projects and also where we're able to make the best investments. I think Yannick said at the beginning that this is a little bit of a proof of principle. And Craig said that hopefully later on, we will not be needing GCF's capital to attract investor. But I mean, we have a finite envelope of capital. GCF currently has $10 billion, as Yannick said at the beginning. About $3 billion of that is in the private sector. And the team that I'm very honored to lead, we are the ones trying to use our finite resources in a way that we crowd in private capital and that we're able to also innovate. This transaction is a 100% adaptation finance transaction. Which for us is very important to do more. Out of all the climate funding flows, only 5% is in adaptation projects. And as has been mentioned, a very small part of that is into oceans. So this is a great opportunity for GCF to really present a demonstration opportunity, not only on the structure, not only on how we were able to bring the countries, but it's also multi-sector. It's trying to address oceans, ecotourism, waste management, infrastructure. So it's also an opportunity for us to work along all of those things. Now, we believe that this is a bundled offering where we do require the technical assistance and we also require the capital. And I believe also the technical assistance hopefully will enable a systemic approach in really strengthening the enabling environment around ocean and around the blue economy. Because I think that while we talk a lot about green economy or blue economy, is one world. And I think these things are intertwined. And nature-based solution or ecosystem-based solutions have to be working together and find ways of really leveraging one another. So for us, this is a breakthrough transaction, and hopefully a little bit the beginning of an inflection point where we're going to be doing more adaptation, more things around ecosystem-based solutions, and hopefully working a lot more with seeds, African states, and least developed countries. Thank you, Sai, for the opportunity, and thanks all our partners.
Thank you, Henry. Craig, you wanted to come back.
I just want to clarify one thing in response to what Henry said. When I said, hopefully we don't need GCF's blended finance, we're going to need your blended finance, but maybe not in this manner. And with all the innovation you do, I don't want anyone to leave the impression that we're letting you off the hook. But what GCF has done here is really so wonderfully sponsoring such, as Sanjeev said, to such an innovative program. And it's a critical role. There are plenty of other needs for innovation, and GCF is really, I mean, I applaud all you're doing. So, and we're not going to be done with blending even here so fast. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Let me just add as well. With this rainy day today, it's almost like when you're diving, right? But I wanted to take the moment to say SDG 14 today, and really also thank some of the other partners who are not on the panel here, but the UK government, Germany, France, now Canada, but also, as Craig pointed out, Sylvie there, the Prince Albert II Monaco Foundation. I had the pleasure of meeting him. He was here the first day of the World Leaders Summit. And also the Paul G. Allen Foundation, Chuck, who's there, and now Builders Vision, who I'm very happy got through the security. So thanks, and we hope when we meet again next time that this will be a flourishing fund so that we could all see these beautiful companies, that's the core, that's what we want to see.
Yeah, I wanted to build on that, Priti, actually, and ask the panel. We've heard a lot, and this is a very exciting partnership at a very early stage. If we come back a year from now, what would you expect to see? What are you most excited about seeing? What should we be doing if we do this event? Make my job easier. If I organize this panel in a year's time, what should I be expecting to be announced in relation to this program? Perhaps Gideon, we'll start with you.
Well, I just pick up on the comments that came immediately before me and say what I would love to see is the action that's actually happening on the ground as a consequence of this investment. This is such a strong funding model, and there's so much potential here, as was said at the beginning. It'd be great to have some really good examples of that, and I'm sure there will be plenty in a year to refer to.
Okay.
Add to that, I have a concept called SDG 500. I want to see the 500 next companies that are great sustainable companies to match, the Fortune 500. So I hope next year when we're here, we'll have these wonderful examples from the Bahamas, from the Maldives, from all these countries that Henri talked about. So we're going to announce in December the next round of companies that have been approved. They're just being finalized, so I can't announce them right now.
That's great. And Craig, I know there's limits to what you can say, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What can we expect to see?
Well, what we want to see is, echoing again Gideon and Priti, is I don't want to be on the panel. I want to have the companies we've invested in and our project partners say what's happened. And obviously, some of this will be longer term, and we have this wonderfully large grant window to mature projects. And deliberately, it's going to be over time. But I'd like to have 4 or 5 CEOs or project managers sitting here talking in detail and talk about both the economics and the impact that's going to happen. Obviously, it's early. But we do have a robust pipeline, so stay tuned. And I hope even at the Oceans Conference, we'll have some pretty exciting things to say.
Okay, and Henry, please.
Yeah. One of the pillars of GCF's private sector strategy is indeed working a lot more with the financial institutions at the local level. I would love to see some financial institutions in the countries that we're working engaging in this. I think while it is important to have this global global north, global south exchanges of capital, I think it's systemically important to engage the local private sector and the local financing institutions.
That's great. Let me take a question from the audience. David McCauley from WWF.
Thanks very much. It's a great panel and privilege to be here. WWF's, I had the privilege of going to Monaco with Chuck Cooper and at the opening of all of this, and to sort of conceptualize, and WWF's been sort of a party to this, along with TNC and others in terms of project development. We've also generated $7 million from Jeff to complement the grant financing. And we're working with the GCF colleagues on Fiji and Solomon Islands and several other countries to come in with the much deeper support, grant financed, to back the private sector investments. But I just wanted to say for the panel that, these are complex partnerships, and so many countries involved and so forth. And I'm just wondering, how do we move forward? From our perspective, we're trying to do that country by country. And I'm just wondering, how are you feeling about this overall platform? Because it's clear that we can't have one size fits all. So I'm just wondering if you might reflect on that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That's a great question, David. You should be moderating. So how do we move beyond the sort of country approach towards a more programmatic one and deal with those issues? Anyone like to respond to David on that?
Just from my perspective, I want our capital markets to look very different when we meet next year, the year after. Why don't we have these wonderful projects and concepts, reef bonds and funds? I think we all feel so much more attached. So I want capital markets to invest in humanity, in human development and planetary preservation. So the answer to your question is, this fund, I'm hoping, will grow and be this embodiment of one of those things, and then the capital markets will start to evolve. So my call here would be to the global capital markets to come embrace these, planet and human development aspects we're trying to build on.
Okay. Any other final remarks, Craig?
Well, it's a challenge. So, and we are aware of it. We have another fund, which is we've done with GCF, which is Subnational Climate Fund, which our friends from Kenya are in. As with but we have a large number of countries. There are 42 there. And partly the answer is you may be able to do regional approaches. And we do have regions here. And I think the regional approach lets you deal with while dealing with local conditions, try to replicate. The other thing is, I think, which we're very conscious of, is with technology partners or development partners, trying to get those who can even in different geographies, bring the solutions. Doesn't mean you don't need local capacity building, doesn't mean you don't engage with local governments, but at least you can have a technology or development partner or contracting partner who you can repeat with to eliminate transaction costs. But it's there, and we're aware of it, and very much in our thinking. The other thing that makes it easier is having all the convening agents, like in the Bahamas, having all the UN folks on the ground, because as the investment manager otherwise, we need their help to get this done.
Thank you.
But aware of it, and we'll see. That's a thing to ask in a year.
Okay, and Gideon.
Come back to this on? Yes. This on? Okay. Not much. Thank you. Sorry, we're struggling a bit. I wanted to come back to the environmental goals of this activity with something of a response and maybe a slight challenge to the question, which is that there is a danger with this sort of green finance that it can, if you're not careful, be seen as just another company seeking profit, and it's greenwash, and it's not actually helping the environment. I think that's one of the great things about a blended finance model, is that by having public money in with private money, there's a sort of authority to it. But in some other settings, it's certainly true that organizations like WWF have played a role in making sure that there's an accounting of the environmental impacts and the consequences from a non-financial point of view. And those impacts happen locally, of course. Each one is local, but the umbrella organization that we're talking about here enables that ground truthing and enables the quality of the products to be certified. So I think that's you shouldn't overlook the value of having a sort of one-size-fits-all aspect to the program.
Thank you very much, Gideon. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Haoliang Zhu to give closing remarks to us. Virtually is joining us. Haoliang Zhu is United Nations Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Director for the Bureau for Policy and Program Support. I hope you can hear us, Assistant Secretary General, and we'd be delighted to invite you to give us some closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really great that we're meeting together to continue the work we started last year. It's over 1 year ago that we launched this global fund for coral reefs, aiming to achieve $625 million over the next 10 years to support 1 billion people to achieve the SDG 14 with a blended financing model. And I'm really happy to see the growth the fund has achieved over the last year. And we've heard so many encouraging examples of new financing and also new projects. So I will not really repeat what has been said. And what I would like to end is just on the image that I have as my virtual background. And this is a photo of the Jaco Island from Timor-Leste, where I served many years ago. And it is an untouched, pristine island ecosystem, and very small, 11 square kilometers off the coast of Timor. And when I had the opportunity, the fortune to do snorkeling, as the UK colleague said, and that I was just mesmerized by the beauty of the corals and the bay. And to me, coming from China, I'm familiar with the fishing tanks, and it's really like a gigantic fishing tank with even small sharks, just nearby you. You can almost touch. But I'm not only impressed, by this, beauty of nature. I'm also impressed by the difficulties of our journey to get to the island, because along the way, through the communities, I saw the challenges of development, the poverty, the exclusion, the difficulty of access to water, to just simple roads. It took us to take a 4-wheel drive to tread through very difficult terrain to get to the coast. So this discussion just reminds me that really the communities, the ecosystem that supports their living standard, the aspirations for a better life, and also the global significance of this ecosystem, at the end of the day, are what we're talking about today, is what this fund is going to achieve. So let's work together, taking COP26 as an opportunity, a reminder of the urgency that we all face. And really, let's work together to achieve the goals that we set out to achieve. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Assistant Secretary General. Thank you to you. And thank you to all of our panelists. Just to wrap up, I think I understand that next year I'd like to bring everyone back except Craig, because we'll be replaced. Hopefully we'd hear more country examples like the one shared by Shanique and from Fiji around what's actually happening on the ground. We'd hear some more the next level down in terms of private equity managers and hear about the progress. It's great to be joined by so many of our partners in the audience here as well from all of the different sectors. So thank you to all of you. A big round of applause to everyone. And just finally, I wanted to send just a word of thanks to Nicole Trudeau from UNDP for pulling this panel together. She's with us virtually, but thank you, Nicole, for doing all your work in relation to this program as well. So thank you to all of you, and good luck. I look forward to hearing the results next year. Thank you.